Hollywood is a place that shines brighter than almost anywhere else in the world. When people think about it, they imagine red carpets, award shows, and famous faces smiling under flashing lights. But behind all the glamour, behind the movie sets and talk shows, there is a side of Hollywood that most people never get to see. It is a place filled with competition, ego, and quiet cruelty, a place where not everyone plays fair. And for one of Hollywood's most beloved stars, Carol Burnett, this truth hit close to home. Carol Burnett became a symbol of joy and laughter for millions of people. She was one of the few women in the 1960s and 1970s who completely changed what comedy could look like on television. Her show, The Carol Burnett Show, ran for over a decade and became one of the most celebrated programs in American history. Carol wasn't just funny, she was clever, humble, and deeply human. She could make people laugh 1 second and cry the next. She showed the world that comedy could have heart. But what most fans didn't know was that behind that wide smile and those famous skits was a woman who had faced betrayal, cruelty, and heartbreak from people she trusted. Over the years, Carol Burnett spoke in interviews and memoirs about the challenges she faced in show business. She never directly named anyone evil, but those who worked closely with her often described a private list, people who had wronged her deeply. These weren't just rivals or critics, they were people who had used her kindness, her generosity, and her trust for their own gain. In this story, we look into the 5 names that stand out as the most damaging and hurtful figures in her Hollywood life. These stories are not meant as gossip. They are lessons about trust, power, and how a person can survive in an industry that doesn't always reward goodness. The first person on that list was Joe Hamilton, Carol's husband and producer. To the outside world, they looked like the perfect couple. They worked together, laughed together, and created a television legacy that millions loved. But behind closed doors, Joe was a different person. People who worked on the show said that Joe was controlling and sometimes emotionally manipulative. He often made decisions about Carol's work without her permission. He wanted to control the finances, the contracts, and even the creative direction of her show. Carol loved him, trusted him, and believed they were equals. But over time, she began to realize that Joe saw her not as a partner, but as a product, something he could shape, own, and profit from. When Carol discovered that Joe had been hiding business decisions from her, it shattered her world. It wasn't just about money, it was about betrayal. The man she had built her career with was working behind her back. Their marriage began to fall apart, and soon, they divorced. The legal battles that followed were exhausting and painful. Yet, even through all that, Carol refused to become bitter. She decided to take full control of her career, ensuring that no one could ever take advantage of her again. In later years, she said that experience made her wiser, stronger, and more independent. She learned one of the hardest lessons in life: sometimes, the person you trust most can become the one who hurts you the deepest. The next name on her list was Harvey Korman, her co-star and comedy partner on The Carol Burnett Show. Together, they created unforgettable sketches that made millions laugh. Their chemistry seemed perfect, but behind the curtain, their relationship was far from smooth. Harvey was incredibly talented but also had a big ego. As the show became more popular, that ego began to grow. Crew members and writers recalled how Harvey could be moody and demanding. He often wanted more attention, more credit, and more control. Carol, being the generous person she was, tried to keep peace. She treated him with respect and kindness. But one day, Harvey crossed a line. During a rehearsal, he mocked Carol in front of the entire cast. She stopped the rehearsal, took him aside, and told him firmly that she wouldn't allow anyone to treat people like that. Harvey didn't take her criticism well and stormed off the set. Carol was deeply hurt. She had always defended him and treated him as family. After that, their friendship started to fade. Harvey's appearances on the show became less frequent, and by the time the series ended, they barely spoke. Years later, Harvey admitted he regretted his behavior and praised Carol for her professionalism. But the damage had been done. For Carol, that experience taught her another painful truth: sometimes the people who rise with you are the same people who will turn against you when they feel threatened by your success. The third name on Carol's list was one of the most powerful men in movie history, Marlon Brando. Known as one of the greatest actors of all time, Brando was also famous for being difficult, arrogant, and sometimes cruel. Carol admired his talent and thought it would be a dream to collaborate with him. Early in her career, she had the chance to meet him to discuss a possible project. She walked into that meeting full of excitement, but what happened next left her speechless. Brando didn't treat her as a respected performer. Instead, he mocked her ideas, interrupted her when she spoke, and laughed at her attempts to explain her vision. People who were in the room said that Brando called her too nice and too soft for Hollywood. Carol tried to stay calm, but the humiliation cut deep. In that moment, she saw what power and arrogance looked like in its worst form. Brando wasn't trying to give her advice or critique her art, he was trying to remind her that in his world, women were not equals. The encounter lasted only a short time, but it stayed with her forever. Carol later said that Brando represented a kind of cruelty that wasn't loud or violent, it was quiet, casual, and deeply personal. It was the kind of cruelty that makes you question your worth. Yet, instead of letting that meeting break her spirit, Carol used it as motivation. She promised herself that she would never let anyone make her feel small again. The fourth name was another Hollywood legend, Cary Grant. On screen, he was the image of charm and sophistication. Off-screen, though, Carol experienced something very different. During a Hollywood dinner party early in her career, she finally got the chance to meet him. Excited, she introduced herself, expecting a kind word or a polite exchange. But instead, Grant reportedly looked at her with a smirk and said, "I don't talk to clowns." Then he turned away. For a young performer still trying to make her mark, that one sentence was crushing. Carol laughed it off in the moment, but deep down, it stung. That short, painful moment reminded her of how cruel fame can be. She had grown up idolizing actors like Cary Grant, believing that their elegance matched their character. But that experience showed her how shallow Hollywood's hierarchy really was. Behind the smiles and the tuxedos were people who believed that kindness made them weak. Carol took that lesson with her throughout her career. She never let success make her forget where she came from. She treated every person on her set, from the camera crew to guest stars, with respect. It became part of what made the Carol Burnett show so special. Everyone felt welcome, everyone laughed together, and no one was treated as less important. In a world full of egos, Carol created a space of warmth. But perhaps the most painful of all was the fifth name, Lorne Michaels, the creator of Saturday Night Live. By the time SNL launched in 1975, Carol had already spent more than a decade shaping television comedy. Her show had invented the very format SNL would later use: sketches, recurring characters, musical guests, and closing monologues. Yet, when Lorne Michaels and others talked about their inspirations, Carol's name rarely came up. It was as if she had been erased from the story. Carol didn't complain or attack him publicly, but people close to her said she felt deeply hurt. She knew how hard she and her team had worked to open doors for women in comedy. To see her influence ignored by the next generation was painful. But even then, she handled it with grace. In one interview, she said, "If you open a door and others walk through it, that's what matters. You don't always get the credit, but you can be proud that you made it possible." That sentence perfectly shows who Carol Burnett is: humble, forgiving, and wise. She never allowed bitterness to define her story. Even when others tried to erase her, she knew that her work spoke for itself. Over the years, SNL has been compared to the Carol Burnett Show countless times. Comedy historians often say that Carol built the foundation for sketch television, not just for women but for everyone who came after her. Lorne Michaels may not have said it outright, but the world knows the truth: without Carol Burnett, Saturday Night Live might never have existed in the same way. Her fingerprints are still on every sketch show that came after. When you look at these five names, Joe Hamilton, Harvey Korman, Marlon Brando, Cary Grant, and Lorne Michaels, you start to see a pattern. Each of them represented a different kind of challenge in Carol's life. Joe showed her what betrayal looked like. Harvey revealed how ego could destroy friendship. Brando represented arrogance and power used to belittle others. Cary Grant showed her the cold heart of elitism. And Lorne Michaels symbolized erasure, the quiet, painful experience of being forgotten by a system you helped build. These people tested Carol's strength, but they never broke her. After each betrayal, Carol found a way to turn pain into purpose. When Joe Hamilton tried to control her, she took control of her own career. When Harvey Korman disrespected her, she stood up for kindness and respect on her set. When Marlon Brando tried to humiliate her, she used humor to rise above him. When Cary Grant insulted her, she chose grace instead of revenge. And when Lorne Michaels ignored her influence, she let her work speak louder than words. Carol Burnett never became bitter, even though she had every reason to. Instead, she used laughter as her shield. In interviews later in life, Carol often said, "Laughter is my revenge." What she meant was simple: instead of letting anger consume her, she poured her energy into her art. Every time she made someone laugh, it was like proving to the world that goodness can survive cruelty. That's why she remains such a beloved figure. Her story isn't just about fame, it's about resilience, about staying kind when the world gives you every reason not to be. When you think about it, Carol Burnett's career is one long example of how to win without fighting dirty. She showed that humor can heal, even when life feels unfair. She didn't need to call anyone out publicly or create scandals. She simply kept working, kept smiling, and kept delivering joy. Decades after her show ended, people still talk about her sketches, her warmth, and her incredible grace. The people who hurt her have mostly been forgotten, but Carol's light continues to shine. In the end, that's the greatest revenge of all, to outlast those who tried to destroy you. Carol Burnett's story reminds us that true strength doesn't come from anger or pride. It comes from forgiveness, self-respect, and the courage to keep smiling through tears. In a world that often rewards cruelty, she proved that kindness can still win. And that's the real lesson behind the 5 most evil people in Carol Burnett's life. It's not just about who wronged her, it's about how she responded. It's about the quiet power of dignity. She didn't just survive Hollywood's dark side, she transformed it. Every laugh, every sketch, every heartfelt moment on her show became part of a larger message: you can go through pain and still choose light. Even now, in her 90s, Carol remains a symbol of class and perseverance. She continues to inspire new generations of performers who face the same challenges: the jealousy, the disrespect, the silence. Her life teaches them that fame is temporary, but character is forever. So when people talk about the cruel faces of Hollywood, the betrayals, the egos, and the erasures, Carol Burnett stands as proof that you can rise above all of it. She turned heartbreak into humor, betrayal into lessons, and cruelty into compassion. And that's why, even after decades, the world still remembers her not as a victim, but as a legend.